In the basement of the old couple, there was a portal that could transport them to an alien world. But no matter how beautiful the alien scenery was, they had little chance to appreciate it. Both had been diagnosed with various illnesses, and had little time left. The couple struggled to reach a consensus on how to handle the alien portal. Irene and Franklin were a married couple for many years. They had a son who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. Since then, their lives had fallen into darkness. At this moment, they discovered a portal to an alien world in the basement. Wife Irene was very cautious about the portal, believing they might encounter alien creatures. She advocated for burying it. Husband Franklin was full of curiosity about the alien world. He even planned to rally others to explore the mysterious world. In the end, he had to temporarily give up due to his wife's objections. Their views had never reached a consensus over the years. Recently, their health had deteriorated further. Franklin took his wife to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor stated that Irene had little time left, and hoped she could prepare herself soon. Upon hearing this news, Irene showed little change in expression. It seemed that the joke of fate wasn't yet over. During Irene's examination, husband Franklin went to a nearby supermarket to buy supplies. Then he forgot that his wife was still at the hospital, and returned home alone. Later, realizing he had left Irene at the hospital, he hurriedly drove back. By the time he arrived again, the sky had already darkened. Irene had been waiting for a long time, facing her husband's forgetfulness. Irene said nothing, because she knew her husband's situation was also very dire. Their car suddenly stopped midway. It was then that Franklin realized the gas tank was empty. It turned out that Franklin had symptoms of dementia, and often experienced forgetfulness. The elderly couple found themselves trapped on the road like this. At this moment, the neighbor, seeing that the old couple hadn't returned for a long time, began to have other thoughts. For quite some time, the neighbor had noticed that the two elderly people often went mysteriously to the back warehouse at night. He cautiously approached the warehouse, trying to uncover its secrets. However, besides various odds and ends, he found nothing of interest. Disappointed, the neighbor left the warehouse. After a long time, the elderly couple finally returned home. Because they were extremely tired that day, they didn't check the portal in the basement as usual. Instead, they immediately fell into a deep sleep. Unexpectedly, that night, the portal exhibited an unprecedented phenomenon. Perhaps Irene sensed that something was unusual about tonight. She suddenly woke up, and decided to check the basement of the warehouse. But when she walked in, she found a young man lying on the ground, covered in blood. He seemed to be seriously injured. Irene quickly brought the man back to their home, to clean his wounds. Husband Franklin was also awakened by this. The elderly couple cleaned the blood off the young man. However, they discovered that the man had no wounds on him. Clearly, the blood didn't belong to this man. Franklin immediately became wary. He suspected that the man might be a murderer, and decided to call the police. However, his wife Irene held a completely opposite view. Irene recounted how she had found him. She believed that he might not be from this world. She thought they should clarify the situation before making a decision, but Franklin was very stubborn and insisted on calling the police. So, shortly after, a police officer arrived to investigate the supposed murderer. However, after a round of searching, he didn't see the man. The officer was somewhat dissatisfied, thinking Franklin was playing tricks on him.
Franklin hasn't been himself lately. He's confused. And he started saying things.
After hearing Irene's account, the officer felt sorry for the old man and stopped pressing the issue. Seeing the police leave, Franklin was somewhat displeased with his wife's actions. Why did you hide that man? But Irene was also unclear about the reason. Perhaps it was because he resembled their deceased son. Although they didn't let the police take the man away, Franklin still didn't let his guard down. The two examined the man's belongings, and found that this guy seemed to have traveled back from ancient times. He had no modern equipment whatsoever. He was using old-fashioned coins. If it weren't for the modern grammar used in the books he carried, the couple might really think this guy was an ancient person. The elderly couple had just finished checking the man's belongings, when they suddenly heard strange noises coming from the room he was in. They hurried over to investigate, and discovered that he had suddenly developed a high fever. Irene told her husband to go to the pharmacy, to buy some fever-reducing medication. Although Franklin didn't like the young man, he still complied with his wife's request. He lied to the pharmacy staff, saying that his wife Irene had suddenly developed a high fever, and asked for some medication. However, he unexpectedly learned about his wife's test results from earlier in the day. Upon hearing that she might not have much time left, Franklin felt very downcast. Meanwhile, Irene hadn't seen Franklin return for a long time, and was very anxious, worried that the young man might suffer from the fever. She had to use the method her parents had used, to bring down her fever as a child to stabilize him. Irene went to the kitchen to make a ginger soup for the man. The effect was very noticeable. Soon, the young man's fever began to subside. Before long, he woke up from his stupor. The man introduced himself as Jude. Aside from that, he revealed no further information. No matter how Irene asked, the man claimed to have amnesia and remembered nothing. Seeing that he was unwilling to cooperate, Irene decided not to press further. After a long time, old Franklin finally returned. He learned Jude's name from his wife. He became increasingly wary and cautious of this mysterious young man. In fact, the man didn't have amnesia at all. He simply had a very special identity, and didn't want to involve the kind couple. That's why he didn't reveal the truth to them. After Franklin and Irene had all gone to rest, Jude quickly got up, went to the kitchen, grabbed a small knife and headed to the bathroom, using the knife to extract a mysterious blue transistor from his body. It looked like a small diode. Jude immediately smashed it and threw the remnants down the drain. The next day, Franklin was filled with doubts about Jude's origins, so he took some of Jude's belongings to a local antique shop to have the owner appraise them. By examining the style of the coins, the owner told Franklin that these were special coins, issued by the Spanish royalty over 300 years ago. They were extremely limited in quantity and had high collectible value. Upon hearing this, old Franklin quickly asked the antique shop owner to investigate the owners of these coins. Perhaps this could lead to clues about Jude. On the other side, Irene saw the lights in Jude's room suddenly start to flicker. She also found a strange object in the drawer. Curiously, Irene took the object out to examine it. Irene was shocked by the scene before her, and quickly placed the sphere back in its original position. Although Irene was unsure what this object was, she could be certain it was definitely not technology from Earth. It was likely brought by Jude. However, since he hadn't mentioned it, Irene didn't ask. But her husband Franklin wasn't that silent by nature. He accidentally discovered blood on a fruit knife in the kitchen, and immediately guessed that this was left by Jude. He hurriedly told his wife about it, hoping to convince her to take Jude to the police station. But when Franklin approached his wife, he suddenly froze. Because they looked like a real mother and son, they appeared harmonious and warm together. This scene reminded Franklin of their deceased son. He fell silent instantly, developing the thought that perhaps Jude wasn't a bad person. After that incident, Franklin no longer urged Irene to take Jude to the police station. But that didn't mean he completely trusted Jude. In fact, even Irene didn't fully trust Jude. While interacting with him, she was quietly observing him. She noticed many things about Jude that seemed out of place. For example, at the restaurant, he was fascinated by the various foods on the menu, as if he had never seen such things before. Additionally, Jude didn't like modern electronic devices. He was even very resistant to the television, completely unlike a modern human. However, he had never done anything out of line. The most important reason was that Irene saw the shadow of her son in Jude. Since many years ago, Irene had been living in the pain of losing her son. The entire world seemed to have lost its color, but Jude's appearance revived everything. Moreover, Jude's appearance was just too coincidental. He was discovered at that mysterious portal. At that time, Irene and her husband had only discovered the mysterious portal after their son's death, so Irene regarded this mysterious man as her son. Naturally, Jude noticed Irene's acts of kindness. Due to his unique childhood experiences, he began to play the role of her son. Their relationship quickly grew closer. As a result, Jude finally revealed some information about himself to Irene. He pulled out a yellowed photograph from the book he carried. Jude claimed that the person in the photo was his father. The reason he came here was to find his father, who had been missing for many years. Upon hearing his pitiful story, Irene felt even more sympathy for the boy. Only old Franklin remained unmoved. He still insisted that this guy must have ulterior motives, so one day, when Irene wasn't paying attention, he called Jude to the car to tell him,
"Walk away. Don't come back."
Franklin was even willing to pay Jude a large sum of money as travel expenses. Franklin's actions seemed to touch Jude's bottom line. He immediately turned to leave. He seemed to be heading toward the town station. Seeing that Jude could leave so easily, Franklin became even more suspicious, so he chased after Jude and stopped him from leaving. At this moment, Jude's intentions made him feel suspicious. Old Franklin didn't know what to do, so he decided to set the matter aside and slowly observe Jude's true intentions. Just then, a message disrupted his plans. It was from his granddaughter, Jenny. She wanted to come back to visit the elderly couple. Upon learning the reason, Franklin was speechless, because he had taken some money to get rid of Jude. But his granddaughter thought he had been scammed. That's why she came back to visit them. The elderly couple immediately lied, claiming that the money was to hire Jude as a caregiver. This way, they explained the withdrawal and made Jude's presence seem reasonable. The granddaughter seemed to have no suspicion. After all, Irene and Franklin did need a caregiver. Seeing that the elderly couple hadn't been scammed, Jenny didn't linger. If it weren't for Jude's presence, Irene and Franklin would likely have returned to silence. But what they didn't know was that the neighbor who had sneaked into the warehouse had returned. And this time, his search was more thorough than before. He actually discovered the secret passage leading to the basement. The matter of the alien portal was about to be exposed. But Irene and the others were completely unaware. What they didn't expect even more was that people in a desolate desert thousands of miles away were also monitoring them. In a remote desert in Mexico, in a desolate and secluded area, a pair of young lovers were about to indulge in the forbidden fruit of love. But just as they were about to take the final step, the boy suddenly had a change of heart.
Que era un desafío.
Seeing the girl's confused expression, the boy explained everything. It turned out that because of the girl, her family had been staying in this desolate desert. So the boy, along with a few friends, decided to tease her. He made a bet with others that he would win her heart. Now that the bet was fulfilled, he revealed his true self. Just then, the girl's mother suddenly burst into the room and chased the boy away. Even so, it couldn't mend her daughter's broken heart. She had always harbored grievances against her mother, not understanding why her mother guarded the small church built in the wilderness and refused to let anyone approach it. Clearly, this dilapidated church had nothing to offer. Facing her daughter Tony's questions, Mother Kate clearly wanted to say something but ultimately held back. She simply told her daughter that it was their family's responsibility. The next day, when Kate was preparing to drive her daughter to school, she discovered that her daughter had run away from home the previous night. Kate quickly drove around searching for her. After a long search, she finally found her runaway daughter. However, the gap between mother and daughter hadn't been resolved. Tony still didn't understand her mother's actions, and Kate had no intention of explaining. Just then, Kate's phone suddenly emitted an alarm. It seemed someone had entered the church. Kate immediately took her daughter back home. As Kate cautiously entered the church with her gun to investigate, she discovered that the intruder was boldly sitting at the dining table. Even upon seeing the homeowner return, he showed no signs of nervousness. What was even stranger was that Kate quickly told her daughter to go back to her room. She then sat down opposite the intruder. From their attitudes, it was clear they were old acquaintances. Through their conversation, it was learned that the intruder was actually Kate's boss. He had come to assign her a task. However, after seeing Kate's demeanor, the boss was curious if Kate had told her daughter about the organization. To this, Kate simply expressed that she hoped her daughter would get involved later. The superior didn't say much in response either. He just took out a task card, indicating that all the mission information was contained within. Then he left the church. After this incident, Kate realized it was time to tell her daughter everything. So that evening, Kate told Tony that she would be taking her on a trip, and planned to reveal all the family secrets to Tony. Upon hearing this, Tony was incredibly excited and quickly packed her things. She was about to jump into the car and wait for her mother to explain. But at this moment, she was stopped by her mother's voice. Then, with Tony looking confused, Kate led her to the basement of the church. She then opened a hidden switch. An object completely foreign to modern technology appeared before Tony. Kate entered a series of numbers on it. The next second, the scenery around them rapidly changed, and they found themselves in a narrow passage. Kate seemed very familiar with this place. They immediately climbed up the ladder beside them. After an unknown amount of time, they finally emerged from the cramped space and breathed the outside air again, but found that the scenery had completely changed. According to Kate, they had now arrived in New York, 1,000 miles away. Upon hearing this, Tony was utterly shocked. However, her mother Kate seemed unfazed and greeted a man nearby with familiarity. Then, under his guidance, they entered a warehouse. Unlike the simplicity outside, inside were many high-end looking devices. At this point, Kate finally answered her daughter's questions. They were part of an organization called the Galactic Guardians. They traveled around the world through portals. This, including the previous church, was one of their organization's bases. To avoid detection by ordinary people, it was set up in a desolate desert, and they refused to interact with outsiders. Upon learning this truth, Tony clearly found it hard to accept. However, that was completely normal. Then, Kate handed the task card from her superior to the man in charge there. He used some equipment there to decode the password. Soon, 4 sets of numbers appeared on the display. The local manager took out a very detailed map of New York. Then, he marked an area on it according to the 4 sets of numbers. This would be the task area for Kate and her daughter. However, Jude and the others were located right within this area. Moreover, Kate's mission was precisely to find a man. Jude was likely their target. Later, with the help of the local manager, the mother and daughter began a lengthy search of the vast area. On the other side, Jude seemed to sense that someone was pursuing him. As a result, he had a nightmare about being chased. Jude was startled awake by the scene. He felt a vague sense of unease in his heart. He quietly slipped out of his room and buried the mysterious glowing ball from the drawer in the woods behind the house. After finishing everything, Jude finally let out a slight sigh of relief. However, his seemingly hidden actions had all been observed by old Franklin. When Jude returned, Franklin had already been waiting there for a long time. This made Franklin increasingly suspicious of Jude's identity. He once again considered sending him away. Coincidentally, Jude had claimed that he was there to find his father. So Franklin used this reason to take Jude to the police station, claiming to help him find his father using the photograph. In reality, Franklin took the opportunity to sneak into the nearby office and report to the officers. He claimed that Jude was a terrorist due to Irene's earlier explanation. The officers thought Franklin was having another episode, so they didn't take this seriously at all. Seeing that they didn't believe him, Franklin was angry but felt helpless. Unbeknownst to Jude, Irene saved him once more. At this time, Jude was still telling the attending officer about himself and his father. With that photograph as evidence, the officer quickly found that there had indeed been such a person. However, the last sighting of him had been 20 years ago. According to the officer, this guy had been wandering in a park and was taken in by the police. Later, the police tried to help him find his family, but no matter how they asked, he seemed to have amnesia and remembered nothing at all. In desperation, the police had to let him go and continue wandering. This was the last record. As for where that man went afterward, the police had no idea. Jude felt a bit disappointed. However, soon a new lead presented itself to Jude. Upon returning home, he happened to encounter Irene's student visiting her. Later, it was revealed that this guy had been expelled from the hospital with no job prospects. He planned to come to Irene's place to work as a caregiver temporarily, but due to Jude's presence, Irene had to decline the student. Little did they know this would lead to a big trouble. At this moment, no one was aware of it, because Jude happened to receive a phone call. It was originally intended for old Franklin, but the antique shop owner clearly didn't know the situation at Franklin's home. He mistakenly thought Jude was Franklin's son. He promptly revealed that Franklin had previously commissioned an investigation into the coins. Recently, there had been new information. A professional indicated that he knew many inside details. However, he wanted to meet with old Franklin in person. Upon hearing this news, Jude immediately kept this from Franklin and secretly arranged a time with the antique shop owner because those coins were very important to him and related to his father's whereabouts. After handling this matter, Jude finally had time. It was then that he discovered all his belongings were missing. Jude thought for a moment. He concluded that the thief was likely the woman who had come during the day. The items inside were very important, so Jude was anxious and restless. He hurriedly found the business card left by the woman and planned to retrieve his belongings using the address on it. However, Jude seemed to have forgotten one thing. He didn't know his way around at all. As a result, Jude got lost while walking down the street. Before he knew it, he walked into a bar. Jude immediately took out the card and asked the bartender for directions. To his surprise, he ran into Irene's granddaughter. She invited Jude to have a drink with her, and so, Jude unknowingly drank quite a bit. When he finally walked out of the bar again, he was completely drunk and staggering down the street. Unfortunately, he was spotted by a passing police officer. The officer immediately identified him as a homeless man. He was about to take Jude back to the station. However, at this moment, Jude was so drunk that he mistook the officer for someone chasing him. He immediately turned and ran toward the side of the road, preparing to evade the police, but Jude had drunk too much, so he didn't get far before the officers caught up with him. Moreover, his reaction to run away caused the police to misunderstand, and they quickly put handcuffs on him. Just at this moment, Irene, having not seen her husband Franklin for a long time, was driving around looking for him. She happened to pass by and saw this scene. Naturally, she hurried to explain for Jude. As a result, she was taken back to the police station to give a statement. Franklin was furious about what had happened during the day. Although he did have severe forgetfulness, the police's distrustful attitude made Franklin very angry. The neighbor noticed that Franklin was in a bad mood. He immediately suggested they go out for a few rounds to lighten the mood. During this brief interaction, their relationship quickly grew closer. Plus, old Franklin had drunk quite a bit more of his sorrows away. At this point, he looked quite drunk. Seeing the opportunity, the neighbor began to reveal his true intentions. He took the chance to ask Franklin about the basement in the warehouse. But to his surprise, Franklin quickly sobered up upon hearing that word. He hurriedly stated that it was just a normal basement used for storing junk. However, the neighbor clearly didn't believe such an excuse. Seeing that Franklin was unwilling to cooperate, he resorted to more aggressive tactics.
Alright, I'll just make sure to tell them about the alien ship under your backyard.
Old Franklin realized that would only make matters worse. the matter of the alien portal would become widely known, Franklin decisively compromised, asking the neighbor to keep it a secret, and revealed that there was indeed an alien portal inside. Upon hearing such an outrageous claim, the neighbor didn't believe him and insisted on seeing it for himself. With no choice, Franklin had to lead him back to his home. He skillfully went to the basement, but this time was a bit different from before. No matter how hard Franklin tried, he couldn't pass through the portal to reach the alien world. The neighbor immediately concluded that he had been played by Franklin. This was clearly just a regular passageway. The neighbor angrily called Franklin an old fraud and stormed off. Originally, keeping the secret of the portal should have been a source of happiness. However, Franklin was troubled by the term old fraud, so he surprisingly handed a camera to the neighbor. Inside were all the alien landscapes that Franklin had photographed on the other side of the portal. Old Franklin asked the neighbor to develop the photos to prove he wasn't lying. Seeing Franklin's actions, the neighbor thought he was having another episode, but when the neighbor developed the photos and saw the alien landscapes, he was utterly shocked. At this moment, the neighbor finally realized that everything Franklin had said was true. At this time, Irene was unaware that her husband had disclosed the entire matter of the portal to the neighbor. She had just managed to resolve the issues with Jude in order to successfully bail him out. Jude revealed many previously hidden details. Irene learned that Jude actually belonged to an organization called the Galactic Guardians. Jude had secretly left the organization to find his father and came here. At that time, he had only fled because he thought the police were assassins sent by the organization. Jude stated that although he had concealed some information, he had no ill intentions toward Irene and the others. With this open and honest conversation, Irene was able to bring Jude out of the police station. She then learned that his belongings had been stolen by her student. Irene immediately took Jude to her student's residence to demand his lost items. The student was clearly shocked to see her teacher suddenly arrive. During the subsequent conversation, she continued to deny the act of theft. Ultimately, it was only after Jude sneaked in and found his missing items that the pointless argument ended. However, during this time, Jude accidentally discovered a strange necklace. He immediately recognized that the pendant was actually a broken tracker, and it was specifically used by their organization. Jude couldn't help but suspect that the woman might also be a defector from the organization. After seeing the photos, the neighbor completely believed Franklin's words. He quickly searched online. To his surprise, he immediately found a wealth of information about alien portals. Some of it could even be traced back hundreds of years. The neighbor found Franklin again, and said he knew where the problem lay. Then the neighbor took old Franklin to the basement of the warehouse. After a thorough search, they finally found the switch that the online users had mentioned. However, this thing looked completely different from the photos online. It seemed to be missing some parts. The neighbor speculated that this might be why the portal couldn't activate. Old Franklin thought back carefully. He confirmed that the anomalies had started when Jude appeared. However, he didn't disclose this to the neighbor. Little did he know that the neighbor, without any clues, had actually found the parts that Jude had hidden. That day, the neighbor was walking his dog. He accidentally noticed that a certain spot on the ground looked very strange. He hurriedly began to dig it up. It was then that he discovered the buried sphere. With just one look, he could tell that this was definitely not technology from Earth. The neighbor immediately took the object to the switch. He exerted a lot of effort to fit the sphere into the switch. Although it fit perfectly, the portal still showed no response. It seemed to be lacking energy. Suddenly, the neighbor had a bold idea. He planned to use a generator to power the mysterious device. And so, Franklin moved a diesel generator into the basement. Then he connected the mysterious device to the generator. After a chaotic fiddling, the device actually started running again. However, at the moment the device activated, a powerful shockwave swept outwards. Some weaker animals perished instantly. Such a powerful energy reaction immediately caught the attention of Kate and her daughter. They had been monitoring the area all along. Kate immediately stated that they had found their target. Old Franklin and the others were still unaware that danger was approaching. They were immersed in the joy of seeing the alien landscapes. As for why they made such a loud noise without Jude noticing, it was because he wasn't there at all. After leaving the police station that day, he accidentally received a piece of information. He heard that his father had appeared somewhere years ago. He immediately wanted to go check it out. However, Irene's health was deteriorating, so she couldn't accompany him. She could only send her granddaughter Danny to accompany Jude as support. So the two of them traveled to Mississippi. They met the black man named John mentioned in the information. He confirmed that he had indeed seen Jude's father, but that was many years ago. At that time, his father was still alive. Although many years have passed, the man still remembered vividly. It was actually John's father who met Jude's father, because he couldn't bear to see him being hunted. John's father offered to help him. Later, Jude's father took out a tracker and asked John's father to help deal with it. After several twists and turns, it ended up in the hands of Irene's student. Although John didn't know where Jude's father was now, he did know the destination Jude's father had left for back then. With John's guidance, Jude and Danny arrived at a certain motel. The motel owner, upon seeing the photo, confirmed that she had indeed seen Jude's father back then. However, unfortunately, she didn't know where he was now. She didn't even know where he went afterward. The clues had completely run dry at this point. Jude and the others could only rest here for the night. They would discuss their next steps later. However, they didn't know that the motel owner had another identity. From the moment they entered the motel, she had been secretly watching them. She even sent a car to follow them, after Jude and Danny left the next day. Clearly, she had ill intentions toward them. In reality, the owner belonged to another hostile organization. She had been planning to lure Jude there for a long time. In fact, the information from the antique shop owner was also leaked by her. However, she didn't expect him to come to her. Of course, Jude's trip wasn't without its rewards. He accidentally discovered an old book in the motel room, where his father had stayed. Inside, there was a mysterious note. Perhaps it contained other clues about Jude's father. On the other side, during Jude's absence, old Franklin and the neighbor had a bold idea. They planned to step through the portal and explore the mysterious alien world. Before, his wife Irene had always prevented Franklin from doing so. Now, with a like-minded companion, he decisively took out his homemade protective suit that he had prepared for years. The neighbor put it on without any hesitation. However, when it was Franklin's turn, he hesitated. Franklin claimed he couldn't let go of thoughts of his wife and was worried about potential accidents. The neighbor understood Franklin's thoughts, so he stepped through the portal alone into the outside world. At first, Franklin was still able to communicate with the neighbor via radio, but as the neighbor ventured further away, the signals coming through the radio began to get strange. The neighbor even claimed that he saw a human-crafted table there. This left Franklin feeling puzzled. After some time, the neighbor suddenly went silent. No matter how Franklin called out, there was no response from the other side. If nothing unexpected had happened, he was likely no longer alive. The outcome of this exploration left Franklin feeling both disappointed and guilty, but he didn't dare to tell anyone about this. On the other side, Jude kept trying to decipher the content of the note, using the annotations left in his father's book. He discovered that it was actually a coordinate for a teleportation location. Before he could attempt to use it, Kate and the others pursuing him had already arrived in the town. At first, they relied on the most primitive method of posting missing person notices to look for Jude. However, after some maneuvering by Tony, they actually found a video of Jude online. They hurriedly went to the bar featured in the video. The bartender immediately handed over the business card Jude had brought that night to Kate and Tony. Thus, following the address marked on it, the two arrived at the student's residence. The student learned that Kate and the others wanted to know about Jude's whereabouts.
Some sob story about how you're trying to help that guy. You want to know where he is? It'll cost you $3,000.
Upon hearing the price quoted, Kate immediately went back to ask her superior for funding. The other parties showed no hesitation. They quickly brought a batch of gold coins to the woman's residence. Perhaps seeing her so easily concede, the woman actually asked for more money. Seeing her so greedy, the superior immediately subdued her, forcing her to reveal Jude's location. The woman hurriedly shared the information she knew. However, it was already too late. Her previous actions had completely angered the superior. Now, even if she revealed the information, she couldn't escape death. The superior then burned the body in the woman's car, disguising it as an accident. Only after that did he take Kate and the others to Irene's residence. However, they didn't rush in immediately but waited outside. It was not until Kate saw Jude leave the house that they rushed in and quickly subdued Irene and the others. Of course, the superior had no intention of letting Jude go. He instructed Kate to quietly follow behind and wait for an opportunity to strike. The reason he went to such lengths was that Jude and his father held a secret about the organization. This is why he tried to kidnap these ordinary people, to force Jude to comply. On the other side, Kate followed Jude all the way to a certain spot in the town. She saw Jude get out of the car and talk to a girl. Kate immediately seized the opportunity to attack the two. Fortunately, Jude reacted quickly, so he wasn't hurt. He immediately guessed the identity of the attacker. Jude quickly made a decision. He would cover for Danny, allowing her to go back and get help. However, Jude was unaware that Irene and the others had already been captured by the superior. So Danny's actions were a trap for herself, and Jude was left to fend for himself. Before long, he was brought back before the superior by Kate. At this point, they had already located the exact position of the alien portal. With this, Jude had become useless. The superior immediately ordered Tony to eliminate Jude, branding him a traitor. This would serve as her initiation into the organization. Kate's expression was very complicated. Then she surprisingly defied the superior's orders. Expressing her desire to take out Jude herself for her daughter, although the superior was somewhat reluctant, he didn't say much. Just as Kate raised her gun to eliminate Jude, old Franklin suddenly charged in. He rushed toward the superior, causing chaos at the scene. Jude immediately seized the opportunity and attacked the superior. The superior immediately ordered Kate to take them out. To his surprise, Kate knocked out the superior. She had betrayed him as well. It turned out that Kate had long grown tired of being used at will. This led her to develop a rebellious spirit. Moreover, the superior had just forced her daughter to kill someone. This made Kate resolute in her decision to defect from the organization. With the superior knocked out, Jude and the others were no longer in danger. Kate stated that she would deal with the superior later and then drove away. However, they hadn't driven far before they were blocked by a group of people. It was the motel owner. She immediately subdued Kate and the others. Upon finding the superior unconscious in the car, she ordered her men to take them back to the base. Jude was unaware of what was happening with Kate and the others. He was determined to continue searching for his father. Jude arrived at the location of the portal switch and took out a mysterious device. It turned out to be the remote control for the portal. He then entered the coordinates he had previously deciphered into it. With Danny, he completely vanished from everyone's sight. Seeing his granddaughter leave with them, old Franklin felt a twinge of sadness. With little time left, old Franklin finally resolved to carry out his long-held plan. He explained to his wife about his previous exploration of the alien world with the neighbor. Now, he decided to take that step as well. This time, Franklin disregarded his wife's objections and resolutely put on his homemade spacesuit. Following the neighbor's previous route, he entered the mysterious alien world. After walking for only a moment, he saw a table. Old Franklin recognized it as the table that had suddenly disappeared from his home. Clearly, this was the Earth-made item the neighbor had mentioned before. After that, old Franklin walked further and saw a body lying on the ground. However, it wasn't the neighbor's. He guessed that it might belong to someone who had been chasing Jude. At this moment, Franklin suddenly realized that the oxygen in his spacesuit was running low. The remaining oxygen was insufficient to support his return. Franklin thought this but felt no fear. He had long been prepared to sacrifice for his ideals. However, as his consciousness began to fade, he unexpectedly saw his wife appear before him and take off his helmet. Franklin thought this was just a dying hallucination, but the next second, he was delighted to find that it was all real. Then he realized that this alien world allowed for normal breathing. The two elderly people held hands and continued deeper into the world. Suddenly, they caught sight of a magnificent alien city in the distance. The film ends here. The TV series Night Sky premiered in May 2022. Although the film's theme was very innovative, the plot was entirely something else. It was basically a family drama dressed in a sci-fi facade. There was hardly any content about the portal. Most of it focused on the characters' emotional changes. Perhaps because of this, a second season hasn't yet been released. Even the ending of the film felt rushed. If you enjoy my channel, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to it.